Sunday morning. We'll also say this, and I may get a few amens when I say this. Based upon the last 2 or 3 days, I'm ready for summertime. Goodness gracious. Oh, it's weather just, I know it, yeah, winter did just start. As far as I'm concerned, it can end if it's going to be, the funny thing about it is, what is it they say, if you don't like the weather in Tennessee, just wait a little bit and it'll change. This Friday is supposed to be 66 degrees. 60 degrees above what it was this morning. So, but I guess that's all part of the fun of being in Middle Tennessee. So we have been talking the last few Sunday mornings about the 7 things that God hates. And we're going to continue that this morning. I have to say, I dare say it was beautiful. The Bible says that it was a vineyard, and I can't help but think that it must have been a really productive piece of ground. In fact, it was so beautiful, it was so productive, it was so readily available, Ahab wanted it. This is from 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard which was in Jezreel, next to the palace of Ahab king of Samaria. So Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, Give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near next to my house, and for it I will give you a vineyard better than it, or if it seems good to you, I will give you its worth in money. Ahab had a desire for this piece of ground that was owned by Naboth. Like I said, it was nearby. It must have been beautiful. It must have been productive. And Ahab's desire for it was so great, he said, I will give you a better piece of land for it. And he said, if that's not good enough, name your price. But Naboth was an honorable man, and in verse 3 he says to Ahab, The Lord forbid that I should give the inheritance of my fathers to you. And you remember what Ahab did? As king of Israel, you know what he did? He pouted. Bible says that he went home, laid down on his bed, and sulked. And his wife Jezebel came in and basically asked him what was wrong. He told her, and she said, Don't you worry about it, I'll take care of it. Now this is from verse 8. It says, And she wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his seal, and sent the letters to the elders and the nobles who were dwelling in the city with Naboth. She wrote in the letter saying, Proclaim a fast, and seat Naboth with high honor among the people, and seat 2 men, scoundrels, before him to bear witness against him, saying, You have blasphemed God and the king. Then take him out and stone him, that he may die. So the men of the city, the elders and nobles who were inhabitants of the city, did as Jezebel had sent to them, and as it was written in the letters which she had sent to them. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth with high honor among the people, and 2 men, scoundrels, came in and sat before him, and the scoundrels witnessed against Naboth in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth has blasphemed God and the king. They took him outside the city and stoned him with stones so that he died. And that brings us to number 6. 7 things that God hates: a false witness. Proverbs 6, verse 16 says, These 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. In this list of 7 things that we're told that God hates, God detests them, lying is mentioned twice. One, we would say just lying in general, and then the second time here is telling lies about someone. In fact, God despises it so much, bearing false witness is one of the top 10, the first 10. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, from Exodus 20, verse 16. You see, God hates dishonesty, and dishonesty that can destroy another. Look at this passage here from Proverbs. Do not be a witness against your neighbor without cause, for would you deceive with your lips? And I think it's important it says there, without cause. Is there ever a time then maybe we have to bear witness against a neighbor? Could be. Could be a border dispute. Could be that a crime has happened and you witnessed it across the street. We've got, probably don't want to say this, but we've got a neighbor across the street. I bet the police been there half a dozen times in the time they've lived there in the last six years or so. So, there may be a time when we have to, but just to do it for the sake of doing it, the Bible says not to. Look at this from Exodus 23. All right, so look at verse 1. It says, you shall not circulate a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. And notice what this verse says. All right? Don't circulate a false report. Don't circulate something that's untrue. All right? So that's the first thing. Then notice he says, don't put your hand with. Don't participate with the wicked. All right? So that's the second thing we see in this verse. And then the third thing is to be an unrighteous witness. False, wicked, and unrighteous are all mentioned in this verse. And God says, don't participate in those. Look at verse 2. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil. That's a passage we've all heard, been familiar with. Nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. Y'all ever heard of any instances when justice has been perverted? We could probably go over the last 10 years from news reports and find all kinds of things. If we trials or public record, we could probably go through all kinds of things and see where, for whatever reason, the right thing wasn't done. But here, following a crowd to do evil, but also don't testify in a dispute to pervert justice.
All our news broadcasts will come close to doing that. Mm-hmm. Just depends on how it's wanted to be spun.
That's right.
How they want to spin the news.
That's exactly right. Pass it down that way, Phil.
In my lifetime, because I'm not that old, but that's what I'm saying. In my lifetime, if you bore false witness in court or something like that, you'd be held in contempt. Mm-hmm. It was a very serious thing. Yeah. Nowadays, like you mentioned the news, nowadays we see it all the time, and nothing happens to the people who are, or very rarely does anything happen to the people who actually, lie in a court or under oath or, something like that. It's like there's no consequence for that anymore.
Yeah, that's true. While y'all were talking, I was trying to think of it. What was it he said that time? It depends upon what you mean by is. Y'all remember that, don't you? That's about 30 years ago. Bill Clinton and that Monica Lewinsky scandal. And that, to me, is a very good illustration of no one being held accountable. Regardless of whatever your political affiliation is, regardless of whatever you feel, the truth came out that the President of the United States perjured himself under oath. Nothing was done about it. That's right. And if you go back 50 years ago, it didn't matter which party, they were getting ready to take Richard Nixon out of office. So it shows you how times have changed and how lax the morals and the ethics of our society have become. Good points. Look here, this is from verse 3 of Exodus 23. You shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. Now, I find it interesting that in this verse here, a lot of times whenever we, if we listen to news reports and if we know of different circumstances where wealthy people or influential people have basically gotten away with murder. You know, and it's easy to say, well, of course they are because they've got money, they've got influence. But here, God says, don't even show partiality. Don't be a false witness, as it were, for somebody who's poor. You know, because, you know, they're in a bad circumstance and we got to help them out and all. But God says, don't even do that. He says, be truthful in everything.
I don't want to get into too much politics, but that right there is happening today as we sit here. Mm-hmm. That, you know, the refusal to prosecute a criminal because of their, I don't know if you want to say station in life or, you know, race or whatever the other reason is, but being that this is, say, you know, dealing with poor. But that's going on today. Is that, and then there's, you know, this movement going on today, and I forget what it's called, but the bail, you know, if you're rich, they'll charge you a higher bail than if you were poor. You know, that kind of, so there's really no standard, you know, today. Everything, like you mentioned, everything's relative.
Right.
You know, so, but that's happening today.
Yep, good point, good point. All right, let me ask everybody this question. Have you ever been accused of something and you knew you were totally innocent? Raise your hand up if that's true. I see hands all over the place. You ever been accused by that? Sure you have. We all have, most likely. And I'll, you know, it may not even be accused of something. It could be that maybe you were misrepresented. Something you did, something you said, and you knew, I didn't say that, or I didn't do that. And I can say this morning, I have experienced that both as a school teacher and as a gospel preacher. I'll tell you this story. This happened probably 10 years ago. But it's one of those things, you know, it sticks with you, you remember it. Had a student, as many teenagers are, he was kind of lazy, wasn't doing his work, wasn't turning things in and such. And at the middle of the grading period, we sent progress reports home. And it was a grade for my class at the time. They would get their parent's signature, bring it back, and I put it, well, this boy, he brought back his progress report. His dad signed it. About a week later, 2 weeks later, I don't remember what it was, we had the quarterly or the parent conference that we had for, you know, across the county. And that morning, before we had them that night, I was forwarded an email from our principal where she had been contacted by Dad complaining that his son was failing, that I hadn't been in touch with him. I wasn't doing my job, basically. First of all, this parent and I had been emailing back and forth, so it kind of threw me off. Why did he go straight to the principal? Why didn't he contact me? But then the second thing, I was like, well, wait a minute. Progress reports just went out. So I always kept them. So I flipped over, there's the boy's name, there's the signature. And of course, not proud to say it, but I became angry because I was being misrepresented. I was being lied about. Parent came in that evening. The boy came in with his dad. The boy's assistant principal I had sitting there. And just like a lawyer, I had this piece of paper and I turned over. I said, "Is that your signature?" He dropped his head because it wasn't. The boy had signed it because it had a failing grade on there. He sent his son out. We talked a little bit more. And he apologized to me before he left that meeting. Made me feel so vindicated. It's like, yes, you know. But I mean, we've all had times when we experience things like that, right? Well, we don't like it, and you know, we need to understand that as Christians, we have an obligation to be honest and be truthful in every aspect of our life, all right? So why do you think God hates dishonesty? Well, I got to thinking about this question, And I got to thinking of it like this, all right? So first of all, we know in Hebrews 6, verse 18, it tells us that it's impossible for God to lie. That anything God speaks, or I guess really we should say anything that God has spoken is truth, right? John 17, verse 17, sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. So if that's the case, all right, so if God speaks the truth, look at this from 1 Peter 1. Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not conforming yourself to the former lust, as in your ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. Because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. So my line of thinking on this is, if God speaks the truth with us because it's impossible for him to lie, and we are to be holy as he is holy, obviously he expects us to speak the truth. Go ahead, Jeff.
So I don't mean to dominate the conversation, but if you back up one slide, I just want to point this out. It's very trivial, but I just want to point it out. You'll hear people say, well, God can do anything he wants to do. That right there, and there's some other things in the Bible like that too, about God and just about God, I guess you say, or his nature or something like that. God cannot do anything he wants to do, right? There's some things like that right there that, so I just wanted to point that out. So it just caused us to think a little bit more about that.
That's a good point. Very good point. See, Phil, or somebody right here.
Along Jeff's lines, I've always thought of God as setting limits on himself. He can set limits, we can't. And in that, there are some, I might be completely off base, but it makes sense. It's the same way as how you become his child. He has set the limits, and he is never going to change his limits or his direction, and the individual has to accept those and go through those to be one with God. And so I look at it as God sets limits on himself. It's not that he couldn't do whatever he wanted to do, but he sets the limits by which we have to follow.
Yeah, good point. Good point. All right. Okay.
Hey, Mike. Sound booth.
Oh, yeah, John.
I was going to say, in this particular case, when it says that God is impossible to lie, God spoke the universe into power. So whatever God speaks comes to being. So he can't, even if he spoke something that seemed to be a lie, it would come true.
Yeah.
And I think when there's a movie, it's not a great movie, and you probably shouldn't watch it, but it's the one, I think it's Bruce Almighty. Mm-hmm. And he's playing with God, and he said, well, guess the number behind my back. And God says 6, and he sticks his hand out, and he has 6 fingers on his hand, right? So, it's that sort of thing. When God speaks, it comes to being. Yeah. So he can't lie.
Yeah, very good point. Good. All right, so look at my line of thinking here. It's impossible for God to lie because his word is truth. And if we are to be holy as God is holy, then that means we should be honest. We should speak the truth. That means not even a little fib, not even a little white lie. If you think about it, it's a dangerous thing, right? Revelation 21:8. Who's going to be in the fires of hell? All liars. It didn't say just a few. It didn't just say some. It didn't say those who told really bad lies. It said all liars. Now, look at this one here also from Ephesians 4, verse 25. Therefore, putting away lying. So if you think about that, Paul says, put away lying. Don't be dishonest. But then, and if I remember correctly, he's quoting from Zechariah chapter 8 here, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Let me show me by raising your hand. How many of you like to be lied to? Nobody? You got to be kidding me. You mean there's people in here who y'all don't like somebody to tell you a lie? Oh my goodness, I didn't realize you all were so... Nobody likes to be lied to. You know? Nobody likes to be lied to. As a spouse, as a parent, as an employee, as an employer. I mean, we could go on. You want people to be honest with you. And hopefully, the reason you want people to be honest with you is because you are honest with them. That's what Paul is trying to say here. Speak the truth. Now, where was it? Or was it, it was the last time we talked about lying. I think it was Jeff. I'm going to get him in trouble now. He's talking about, if your wife asks if that outfit looks good on her. Ooh, it's kind of like, ladies, don't ever put us in that situation because, that's just, we won't even talk about that. Let me ask you, actually look at this quote here. See, there's some things that's worth far more than riches. Character will support a man in many circumstances, and there are many rich men that have no name, but the word of the man of character will go farther than all of his riches. Think about that. There's some people, that's what they live for. Money, 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 wealth, possessions. And unfortunately, we know from media, from news and so on, that there's a lot of folks in this country who obtain that wealth, I wouldn't say illegally, but maybe immorally. What would you say, Charles? Questionably, yeah. Immorally, because of the parts they play in movies, because of the words they sing in music. I mean, we could go on, with a lot of things like that, But notice what this says. Character will go much farther than wealth. Think about, let's see, where am I here? All right, here we go. Is this a true statement? I don't care what you say about me as long as it's the truth. If it's the truth, does it matter? Oh, I didn't say slanted. I just said the truth. I'll give you an instance here. This is several years ago when I was at Laverne High School. We teachers, we have seating charts from time to time. And I had a seating chart, and this one particular young lady where she sat, she didn't want to sit there. So I took her out in the hallway. I was like, what's the problem? What's the deal? And she said these two boys beside her were calling her an ugly name. So I looked at her and I said, is it true? And she looked at me. She couldn't believe I asked that question. She said no. And I said, well, don't worry about it then if it's not true. That's just them being children, being childish. Let's see here. There is nothing, Mark 8, verse 36. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? We all know that verse, and we all understand that verse, and we believe that verse. And there's nothing that any of us would do, I hope, in this world to jeopardize our soul. Okay? But while we're on this earth, while we're living on this earth, it's important to me, and I'm sure it's important to you, to be viewed as being honest and righteous. And all of that can come crashing down because of false witness, can't they? Think about how a good name can be destroyed. Police officers. Now, we know the two that are out here most of the time, and I think we all probably say we think the world of them. They're good fellows. But we also know, again, it goes back to media and news we've talked about, that there's a large segment of our society that paints police officers in a negative light, don't they? all because of just a few bad apples, so to speak. What about politicians? We know one personally, and we know he's a good, honest fellow, and we appreciate your work, Commissioner. But unfortunately, we also know over the last, however many years we want to go back, there's been a lot of them. No. What about parents? Parents can, parents can be brought into question real quickly because of a child that tells something that's not completely honest. Same thing about spouses. School teachers. Do y'all know for school teachers, if a kid says something, the kid is automatically believed? Boom, just like that. So, all it takes is just a single individual saying something that is misleading, that is dishonest, and a good name can come crashing down. In comments.
Hey, Mike, sound boo.
Yeah.
Just kind of going back to where God actually speaks creation when he talks. Things that we speak has a life of their own too. And once you say them and once they're out there, particularly in the world of social media, they're out there. And it's very hard to get them back. And so I think that's probably part of the reason, at least, why God is so adamant about us being honest, is because once you speak it out there, it's out there. And there's things that have been started, again, going on social media that are still going around. That's provably been, false, right? They've been shown to be false, but people still hold to them dearly because they think it's true.
Yeah, okay. And, it makes me think of several years ago, Michael Crichton had a book. It was called Airframe. Some of you may have read it. It was about an accident that had occurred on a flight, an air flight, and it takes a place, basically, the main character is one of the ones working with the airline company trying to figure out what happened that caused this accident. And one of the things that is pointed out to this individual as she's investigating, that as soon as a news organization reports something, and we're talking about here in the United States, they are under no obligation to submit a retraction or a correction to that story. And it goes right along with what John said. As soon as it's said, it's there. And there doesn't have to be any correction to it. It's sad to say, but there's absolutely nothing that we can do to prevent anyone from telling lies about us. Can't do it. You can live a perfect life and people are still going to tell lies about you. Look at the 5 I've got here. We've got Naboth. Let's see, we've got one right here too, Phil. Right here, Miss McGee, right in the middle. Naboth, they told lies about him. Jesus, they told lies about him and he was perfect. What about the apostles? They're in Acts, in the book of Acts. We just finished up Acts. There at the beginning, they were telling lies left and right. So many of them were about the apostles. Stephen, at the end of Acts chapter 6, he's blaspheming God in the temple. Hadn't done a thing. And then, of course, Paul, they did similar things to Paul. Yeah, he brought Gentiles into the temple. Ms. McGee.
Back to that one just before this screen, the one about the different people who sometimes get the lies are told on. I think parents today must have a hard time with that. Just a difficult time because, as old as I am, you never heard the things that people, or you never heard what goes on today with parents. Not when I had kids coming up. If you spanked your child, that was your business. He must have needed it or you wouldn't have done it. But nowadays, parents can get themselves in jail. I'd already been in jail if it hadn't been, if I had been living today, because I'm telling you, I'm not going to put up with my kids misbehaving.
We need to talk about how Jeff was when he grew up then.
I don't know, but I bet he can tell you he got the spankings if he needed it. And the other one did too. But what I'm saying is, that must be difficult for parents now. I mean, I know some kids need spanking, and I know parents do spank kids. But then the kids go to school and say something about mama gave me a spanking or daddy gave me a spanking, and they begin to look to see how many bruises you got.
Yep.
So, you know, and then you're going to get called into the principal's office and want to know why you bruised your child.
Yep.
But you know, that's your child. I don't think you ought to be bruising them either, and I'm pretty sure I did bruise mine.
Yeah.
But I didn't mean to, and I've already told them that too. I'm sorry I had to bruise them, but they needed it or they wouldn't have gotten it.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Yeah,
This is kind of silly, but I think of a lot, kind of like a tube of toothpaste. If you squeeze toothpaste out of the tube, you can't get it back in there.
that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Very good. All right. Yeah, right here, Phil.
On your next slide, you know, the one name I don't see on there that I really think is, you know, an example of someone who did things right, but, you know, the lies, you know, cost him is Joseph.
Yeah, good
Because,
point.
I mean, you know, his brothers, you know, lied about what they did with him, and then, you know, Potiphar's wife lied about what, you know, how he interacted with her. So, I mean, you know, and, you know, he had to pay the price for those.
Very good point. Very good point. John?
It's also, some people may lie about us, but if it's your family, you support them, especially if it's right. Matthew chapter 5, verse 11, the end of the Beatitudes. People may lie about you as a gospel preacher. As long as you're right, God will support you.
Yeah.
And he'll bless you for being right. So sometimes, yeah, we'll go out and say things, we have to be truth, and other people will lie about us, but people lied about Jesus as well, and he died for it. So we have to have the character, like you were saying earlier, to stand up for the truth, even though people are lying about us.
Okay. Very good. I tell you what, sometimes y'all amaze me because y'all do a perfect segue in the next point I want to make. All right? Because look at this here. You know, while we cannot control what people say about us, we can prove them wrong before they ever say a word. Look here, James chapter 3, verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. You know, if people say false things about us and someone else hears them, hopefully they automatically understand and know, well, that's not true because I know that person and I know how that person lives and what that person says. Look here at this from Philippians chapter 1. Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel, and not in any way terrified by your adversaries, which is to them a proof of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that from God. Am I saying that it's okay for people to say false things about us? Absolutely not. Am I saying that false things said about us should not bother us? Absolutely not. I'm not saying those things. But if something is said about us and we know it's false and we know those who really know us know it's false, it's a little easier to take. You know? I know of a circumstance not too long ago, some individuals were afraid of what was being said about them. Well, if it's true, why are you concerned about it? Now, I'm not talking about, something malicious. This had to do with biblical things, that they believed a certain way about biblical things. My thought on that is, well, if what you believe is true, what do you care what other people are saying about you? You know? How do we respond if someone tells lies about us? Well, first thing is we've got to be Christ-like. What did Christ do when people told lies about him? He turned the other cheek. He didn't say a word, did he? We'll let.
I was recently reading something, I forget what it was, but one of the comments that was made in that whatever I was reading said that we care more about the opinion of others than we do of our own opinion of ourselves. And that goes along with what you were just saying there. If especially if it's biblical, if you know that what you believe is right, then your opinion of yourself should be more important than the opinion of others.
Yep.
And
good.
I just thought that was interesting.
Very good. Romans 12, verse 17, repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. 1 Peter 2, 21 through 23, for to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. Christ didn't fire back, we might say, whenever lies were told about him. As people were saying lies about him, if you remember from the gospel accounts, he didn't respond. But if he was asked a direct question, he gave an answer. So we need to make sure if someone's telling lies about us, in our interaction with that person, be Christ-like. But also, I think we have an obligation to ourselves and even an obligation to the one spreading lies to set the record straight. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 9 says, the hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. If someone is telling falsehoods about us, if someone says anything to us, tell them. No, that's not what I said. This is what I said. That's not what I did. This is what I did. But again, we need to be Christ-like in the way that we do it. Any comments or questions? Yes, sir.
When I was growing up, I'm sure most others have heard this little statement, but it might have been true back then, but I don't think it was either. But the word was, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's not true. You can assassinate someone's character by words that are not true. And we have to be careful that we don't pass that on. One of the first scriptures you put up there almost condemned gossip. In other words, don't further any false accusation.
Yep.
We have somebody that might tell us something, but who knows whether that's totally true or not. And we have to really be careful on the internet and Facebook and things like that by passing on information that may or may not be true. If we don't know that it's absolutely true, we have that responsibility that we're sinning by doing that.
Yeah, very good. And again, Jim does a good job going right into the last thing I was going to say. What about gossip? Gossip is false witness. Is that what it was? Yep. All right. 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 11, Paul says, for we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Busybodies. Individuals who stick their nose, if you will, in other people's business. People who are quick to pass along something they have heard about somebody else. And what's the attitude? The more juicy it is, the better it is. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 13 says, and withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers, also and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. The word gossip is not used in the King James. I believe it is in the New King James. I dare say it's probably in the ESV also. But Paul says in both cases, people don't be a busybody. Don't be talking about things you have no business talking about. Have you ever heard it said, if somebody says something to you like, let me tell you what I heard about Debbie Harrell? And have you ever heard it said, if somebody says that to you, the first thing you ought to say, well, let's go ask her about it. Because if all they've done is pass along what they have heard, they'll say, no, we don't need to do that. Did you say they regret it? No, I said, what are you afraid of? Yeah, what are you afraid of? If you know it to be true. So, well, we've got about a minute here. Any final comments or anything? I appreciate y'all's attention. I appreciate the compliments y'all have paid me over the last few weeks. We've got one more week. We'll get 2023 talking about disorderly brethren, or those who sow discord.
Going back to Ahab, if you think about it, Ahab committed all the sins that the passage says God cannot endure.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Thank y'all again. I appreciate it.